Pericles and Athens, the golden age of Greece, seen through the life of her leading statesman by A.R. Byrne. Chapter 6, The Years of Crisis. Wait, are there 2 years of crisis? The Egyptian disaster almost coincided in time with the return of an expedition under Mauronidus from Thessaly, the farthest northward fling of an Athenian island army. Mauronidus had been directed to restore it to his native Pharsalos, an exiled prince, Orestes, a blow at the aristocrats who had played Athens false at Tanagra. He had a large army, including thousands of Boeotian and Phocian allies, but he was baffled on the plains of Thessaly by the mounted noblemen and the retainers who swarmed round his outposts, and, as Thucydides says, confined his occupation of territory to the ground his armored infantry stood on, unable to maintain his army while besieging Pharsalos. Mauronidus retired, and Thessaly, for some years, had to be written off as an ally. This rebuff, however, included no such disastrous losses as the debacle in Egypt. About 200 out of 250 ships had been lost. Their complements totaled anything up to 8,000 soldiers and 32,000 sailors, of whom the great majority perished. Most of these, no doubt, would be allies. To get the Athenian losses, we must deduct the crew of the allied ships, still numerous, say 40%, and of allied sailors, but not soldiers, in the Athenian ships, say a third of their crews. Still, out of some 30,000 lost, at least 12,000 must have been Athenians. Losses of not much under 4,000 soldiers, smallholders, and 10,000 sailors, mostly laborers, fell upon a population which, even if larger now than in 431, we would have figures for armored men. When we have figures for armored men, can hardly have exceeded 70,000 men of military age. Some good authorities would put it much lower. The 200 out of 250 ships lost is doubted by many scholars, and that the population of Athens could not have stood such losses, but this is certainly the account suggested in Thucydides' introduction, and believed by Isocrates in the next century. Athens was never again to take the offensive simultaneously against Persia and the Peloponnese. As Pericles once said in a funeral oration for a latter campaign, with these young men the spring is gone out of the year. But Athens was never so indomitable as in defeat. In the case of a Phoenician raid on the Aegean, the League treasury was moved from Delos to Athens, a momentous step in the evolution from league to empire. Athenian officers abroad watched keenly for any signs of disaffection. There was trouble at Miletus, where the oligarchs massacred the democratic leaders and succeeded. But by 450 Athens had brought the city to heel again. Meanwhile, in 453, embarking 1,000 armored troops on the ships at Pegae, Pericles himself set sail to demonstrate Athenian power down to the Corinthian Gulf. Pericles began operations as Ptolemaidas had ended, by descending upon Sicyon, where he routed the home levies at the brook Nemea and chased them within their walls. He had hoped even to capture the city, but if he was in touch with the Democrats within, they failed to move, and the Peloponnesian troops were marching to the rescue. Pericles set up a trophy for his victory and re-embarked his force in good time. The fleet sailed on, picking up allied troops from the little cities of Achaia, and crossing the Gulf joined Athens, other allies of Acarnania, enemies of Corinth, which had planted colonies on their coast, and an attack on the distant Acarnanian city of Oiniade among the mudflats of the Achelous. Oiniade, a hard place to get among its water channels, also held out, and Pericles returned home, whether to Pegae or whether now he brought most of the or whether he now brought most of the western fleet back into the Aegean does not appear. He effected nothing, but it had been a successful demonstration, and Pericles' reputation was enhanced by his careful generalship, which had avoided even the smallest regrettable incident throughout the campaign. Pericles, it is clear, had been deeply affected by the inroads on Athenian manpower, especially the farmer and the middle class. Heavy infantry manpower made by warfare of the past 10 years, Egypt, Tanagra, Leagros, this disaster in Thrace, 177 killed from one tribe in a year, with no serious reverse. It was remarked how careful he, once so reckless of his own life, now was of the lives of his men. Depend on it, he would say, so far as depends on me, you are all immortal. Like Montgomery, he never engaged in battle without having done all he possibly could to make victory certain. He never suffered a serious defeat. Now, that's all well and good, but of course the focus should be on if the thing is right, and if it's not for the majority of the people, these working classes and such, we really have no business going to any sort of war. Another source of his popularity was his respect for his citizen soldiers. Remember Pericles? He used to say to himself, "You are commanding freemen, Greeks, Athenians," and he applied all his parliamentarians' arts of leadership to the tricky business, as some generals found it, of discipline in a democratic army. The war with the Peloponnesian League dragged on without striking incident. Now that Athens, as well as Sparta, was above all things anxious to avoid losses, the chief scene of operations in the 3 otherwise blank years may well have been Argolis, or Argos, with Athenian aid, at some unknown date, beat off a Spartan invasion on the field of Oin. No. Both sides were war-weary, and at last, in 451 BCE, Sparta concluded a 30 years peace with Argos, and through Cimon, a 5 years truce. with Athens. Failure to agree on anything more permanent was no doubt due to Spartan unwillingness formally to acknowledge Athens' new imperial position. Athens, meanwhile, was consolidating her league into an empire. Perhaps as early as 453, she inaugurated a new system of kleroches, colonies whose members remained Athenian citizens at strategic points. When Ptolemy led 500 colonists to the important central and once recalcitrant island of Naxos, in the next few years, 250 went to Andros on the route to the Dardanelles, an unknown number under Ptolemydes to southern Euboea, no other side of the Andros Channel, 1,000 under a treaty with the Thracian tribe at Bisaltae to help secure the northern marches of the peninsula of the Chalkidika, maybe, and another 1,000, conducted by Pericles himself, to the Gallipoli Peninsula, where they resumed the work done by Cimone's ancestors, repairing the old wall against the isthmus for Balair, for defense against the warlike tribes outside. The passage of Dardanelles was now a vital Athenian interest for the teeming city populations, was dependent now that Egypt could no longer be counted on corn from the Greek ports and corn-growing Scythian tribes in the Black Earth belt of the Ukraine. Now, that's a lesson they learned from the Persians, is the buildings of huge walls, miles-long walls, to protect from other tribes. So, the northern Asian tribes they were protecting themselves from. When Athens took land from the Greeks for her colonists, she seems to have paid for it by reducing the local community's contributions to the League. Andros's tribute was reduced from 12 talents to 6 in 450 to 449 BCE. Remember, talents like a 50-kilogram weight worth of like silver or something. That of Karastos in the southern Euboea, from 7.5 to 5 at the same time. Naxos, a much larger island than Andros, is paying only 6 2/3 when we first have figures for it in 448, and the Gallipoli cities were still more drastically scaled down after 447. Nevertheless, the islanders resented the kleroches bitterly. What they wanted was not Athens' idea of justice, but to be left to themselves. But Athens was no longer attending what her allies might say. The periodical league conference had lapsed at latest, when the treasury was transferred to Athens. The modern theory that the transference itself was proposed by a powerful ally, Samos, is baseless. It rests upon a dubious story of a proposal which was not accepted over 20 years earlier. Also, whatever Athens may have been doing in Boeotia, she was showing herself not indifferent to the forms of government of her allies in the Aegean, not everywhere, but certainly in several cities. She intervened to impose her own form of democracy, especially on the coast of Asia Minor, where the danger of Persian comeback was still a reality. The fair at Miletos had shown what might happen if control was left to unreliable elements. And so, in the civil year of 450 to 449, the assembly regulated Miletos's constitution according to Athenian ideas. There was similar intervention at an unknown date in the land Ionian city of Colophon, and also now or even earlier at Erythrae, for which we have enough of the Athenian decree on the subject, though the preamble and date have perished, to give a vivid example of the Athenian Empire at work. Now, before we get into that, it's a concept common in my country that people will talk about forcing our democracy, spreading democracy. And by spreading democracy, they mean forcing the ways of this country on other countries and not letting them elect the leaders that they would elect and otherwise. So, I guess it's more hardcore against democracy, the spreading of democracy. But the Athenians, we will conquer you and make you be democratic. But by democratic, we mean you're going to rule yourself in our way. Well, sometime, the conquered people, yeah, there's going to be some of that, but almost never in history has imposing democracy of any sort been, there are a bunch of exemptions, but this idea you can force democracy really falls by the wayside. The chief points are religion. Erythrae is required to send offerings to the great quadriennial Athenian state festival. Nothing could more explicitly emphasize the city's subject status. 2. Constitution. Erythrae is provided with a council closely modeled on that of Athens, those proportionately smaller. Evidently, the Athenians felt that this institution was essential to prevent oligarchic elements from getting the management of the democracy into their hands. Councillors are to take an oath of loyalty to the people of Athens and of her allies, as well as of Erythrae. It also appears from this oath that in certain legal cases, notably those concerning the management of political suspects, reference has been made to the Athenian courts. It transpires also that Erythrae is under Athenian military occupation and is being visited by an Athenian mission of inspectors, episkopoi. Later, the Christian word bishop. That's an interesting thing, is that bishop comes from that. Law. Persons banished from Erythrae for murder will be banished from the whole empire. I don't agree what's going on right now where murder, or even murderers and child molesters and real rapists are just sent back to their home country. Shouldn't we be keeping them safe by not releasing the predator? But we do it in our own country if the people serve their sentence, and the number of convicted murderers that have walked the street. I've, met convicted murderers, and it's like, the following is a translation. Words in square brackets are not in the Greek. The Erythraeans shall bring all the usual sacred victims to the great Panathenaea to a value of not less than 3 mina, 300 drachmas. The directors of the sacrifice shall distribute the meat thereof to the Erythraeans who are present, at the rate of 1 drachma a head. If the sacred victims are brought, but are not of the value of the 3 mina, according to these directions, the directors of the sacrifice shall buy victims and charge the cost to the people of Erythrae and the meat shall be given to whomsoever wishes to take it. And see, that's the problem. It's if there's the willingness and the affordability of the sacrifice, but it's not, well, God demands this much meat this year, and I don't see you guys providing it. I don't worship a blood-hungry, bloodthirsty entity anyways, but I mean, the meat and the flesh, it's not like something God needs. There shall be at Erythrae a council of 120, chosen by lot. Those on whom the lot falls shall undergo scrutiny before the outgoing council of the Erythraeans. No man under 30 years of age shall serve, and if any candidate found to be disqualified shall be liable to prosecution. No one shall serve twice within 4 years. On the present occasion, the lot shall be supervised and the council installed by the Athenian inspectors and the garrison commander, and in the future by the outgoing council and the garrison commander. Every prospective councillor, before taking up his duty, shall swear by Zeus and Apollo and Demeter, invoking destruction upon himself and his children if he be false to his oath. Well, if they're making people take oaths, there's going to be people false left and right, right? Counselors shall administer their business according to the existing laws. For any breach, they shall be liable to a fine of 1,000 drachmas, and they shall deposit as surety with the people of Erythrae a sum not less. The counselor's oath shall be as follows: I will perform my duties as counselor to the best of my ability and faithfully to the people of Erythrae and of Athens and of the allies. I will not revolt from the people of Athens and of the allies of the Athens, nor will I permit another to do so. I will not desert the Persians, nor will I permit another to do so. I will not receive in the city any of those who are in exile among the Persians without the permission of the Athenians and of the people of Erythrae. Nor will I exile any person now dwelling here except by the decision of the Athenians and of the people of Erythrae. If an Erythraean murder an Erythraean, he shall be put to death, if the court so order, and if he be sentenced to banishment, he shall be banished from the whole territory of the allies of Athens, and his goods shall be forfeit to the people of Erythrae. If any person be convicted of conspiracy to betray the late tyrants of the city of Erythrae, he shall be outlawed, himself and his children, unless his children furnish proof of their loyalty and demonstrate to the people of Erythrae and of Athens, if they do so, and deposit all their property of the condemned. His children shall receive back half thereof, and half shall be confiscated. Likewise, if anyone be convicted of treason against the people of Athens or conspiracy to betray the garrison at Erythrae. The rest of the text is fragmentary and indecipherable, except for scattered phrases, including a mention of archers. This may be, as at Athens, Athenian military police. About the same time, the assembly decreed the extension of Athenian weights, measures, and coinage to the whole empire, and the suppression of local currencies, with certain exceptions, notably the gold pieces of Kyzikos on the Sea of Marmara. Athens herself did not coin gold. It was an extremely sensible economic measure. Earlier, there had been, for example, not only 4 independent cities, but 3 independent currencies in the island of Chios alone, with an area much less than that of the county of Rutland, but nothing was more likely to offend local pride and patriotism, even though many of the old currencies had disappeared since the Persian occupation. Now, I guess an easier example would be to say in Islamic State, those who do not believe in Al Quran and consequently what they believe are the teachings of Muhammad, how can they run an Islamic State? So any government has to likewise take that sort of thing. If we're in a government that's a flux, people of all faiths and all sorts of stuff can be the rulers of it. But, well, I mean, there's always flux in terms of economics and traffic and safety and technology sort of things. But outside of that, if you don't believe in the ethical system behind the law, no, I'm not saying that religion should be enforced or anything like that. That's not what an Islamic State actually does. They don't enforce religion. Most of the religious rules have no part in what the government's allowed to do. But yeah, if you're not swearing to what's behind the country, how can you? In America, the Constitution can change. So, if you want to change the Constitution, that's okay. But again, a general American spirit should be part of any American politician, and I'm not sure that should include, people that would raise the welfare for the rich and put us in wars that aren't good for our economy. I mean, like, war after war after war is not good for the American economy and the American well-being. We want rulers that are actually involved in the promotion of the well-being of the American. If we're going to be American, if you're going to be another country, the world too. Pericles, Democrat and even liberal though he was, indeed the first liberal in history, therein lies his originality, had not the slightest doubt of the propriety of these proceedings. It was so clear to him that Athens led the world in all the arts of civilization, that Athens, in his own words, was an education to Greece, that he never doubted but that it was Athens' duty to lead to lead politically too. Most of the inhabitants of the cities, as speakers in the assembly, usually called the empire, and followed Athens willingly. It is clear Athens, the deliverer from the great king of Persia, without and from the little tyrants and domestic oligarchies within. If a little coercion was temporarily necessary to break down parochial prejudices in favor of local money, or to see the reactionary elements did not gain political power, then coercion must be applied until all men are enough should see reason. The Clarukes of these years are said to have been his idea, or that the mentor Demonides, apart from their strategic importance, they were part of his social party, a measure to plant out any poor Athenian who is able and willing on a farm of his own. A liberal is a person who understands that liberality includes not only his own liberty to do what he likes, but other people's liberality to do what he does not like. Pericles' remarks in the funeral oration. Now, another way to define liberal is, not in terms of belief. Sometimes the conservatives and the fundamentalists and even the conservatives are the most for freedom. But a liberal would, they don't do or they don't believe in something. Well, they just don't do something or they don't believe something. That's also called being liberal. So this away from family and religious values to support a new value system which somebody else, okay, that can be liberal. But also liberal could be but then again it would turn to conservative if these values were being just had of someone else's interpretation. It's like, well, you can't be as direct as the fundamentalist. But whether he was in favor of planting it's not a political party. Oh, you vote Republican and you're conservative now. It's like, no, I'm sorry, Mr. President. We're not convinced of that one. You're still a liberal. Whether he was in favor of planting clerices in the limited space of the islands where they produced the maximum of friction for the minimal of land taken is another matter. Those colonies, we are told, if only by late and bad sources, were Ptolemaides' work, and Ptolemaides, the son of Ptolemaeos, both mean the daring, was a man who always seems to have striven to live up to his name. He is said to have been anxious to emulate the fame of Pericles, and he was the natural leader of those impatient of Pericles' new quadragenarian caution. Pericles had the greater reputation at present, but his position was not unsaleable. No man's was. In face of the turbulent assembly, so he is not only serving Athens, but making an adroit move in the parliamentary struggle for popularity, when he, so to speak, outbid Ptolemaides with a larger clerice in the Chersonese, in a place where there was need for it, and where there was no more, and where there was more room. And I guess sounds like I need to stop there. Hopefully I will finish this chapter today.